So apparently many parents across the country are now unschooling their kids. To put simply, they're not giving them any curriculum or any tests or really any structure in their homeschooling journey.
Well, there's a growing and sometimes controversial approach to homeschooling called unschooling. Rather than using defined curriculum, unschooling parents trust their kids to learn organically.
So we don't teach our children anything. Everything that they learn is in response to either their interests or their questions. We have no curriculum, we have no school hours.
Now we're going to dive deeper into this and exactly what this means for the grand scheme of things. We'll take a deep dive into these TikToks and these moms that are claiming that their method of unschooling is the right choice for their children and their students. Now, whether this is true or not is yet to be decided. That's why we're going to dive deeper into that. This is a very complex topic, and I really want you guys to kind of grasp exactly what these people are explaining and everything that it means and the ramifications of this huge trend for the country and its youth population for the future. What is unschooling? Well, many might not know, but unschooling has been around since the 60s and 70s. It's just now, I guess, been getting even more traction over the past few years. This unschooling trend basically makes parents not really give any structure to their students, their kids' learning journey. Essentially, they're not going to be getting any tests, they're not going to be getting any homework, they're not going to be required to learn anything about math, science, reading, writing, history, geography. That's not really in the plans. Essentially, these parents, they truly believe that their kids are just going to be learning by just watching the world around them.
Trust in our children that children will naturally learn. They're naturally curious, just in the same way that a toddler learns to speak and talk.
A lot of these TikTok videos talk about how the kids will be with their parents when they're cooking, or maybe when they're going to the grocery store, they're going to the park. That's the way that these students in this situation are going to be learning. This outside learning, essentially in this logic, is basically going to substitute all that reading and math and writing skills that you get as a young child. You're just going to be learning, I suppose, through reading labels at the grocery store. So let's dive into some of these TikToks so we can kind of comprehend this better.
My son cannot read at age 6. There's never going to be a time in my life where I can say, yeah, my son started reading when he was 5 years old. He's on the Waldorf and Montessori schedule. It's different. But here's the thing about my kid. He's free. He's always been free. And every single day of his life is a blank canvas that he can make whatever art he wants with. Discovery, adventure, art, play, interest. This is what his day is made up of. There's no conformity. There's no needing to pretend that you're sick in order to get a day off. There's no trends. There's no ahead or behind. There's just being free, exactly the way that you are, free to learn at your own pace. And there are so many inmates that will know so much more than me. Inmates get law degrees, get all kinds of stuff. And there's so many inmates that will say, look, this is just the way that it is. This has been a really good thing for me. Everybody else is doing it. We don't live in a creative world. This is just what it is. But would any of those inmates not trade in all of these things they've gotten used to for a chance at being free, for a chance to feel the sun on their face every single day? That's what all of this is about.
Well, there you go. There's one of the infamous advocates for this unschooling trend that we're seeing in the year 2024. So basically, they're okay with their children being behind in reading. They basically say in the video that they acknowledge that and they accept that fact. They basically undermine the importance of being able to read at a sufficient level when you're, 5, 6, 7 years old. And in my opinion, this is kind of a very dangerous territory, like many of you probably will say in the comment section below. Their idea here is that their children will be in a perfect world where creativity will be valued so much that if you don't know how to read or write or do simple math, it will be okay. because you're very creative and you can be a Picasso or you can be a Andy Warhol just right then and there. But here's the problem. There's only one Picasso and there's only one Andy Warhol. Those are basically 1 in a million. And everyone else in between, 1 in 100,000, if you will. Not to say that her children won't live off of their brilliant creativity. The simple truth is that it's very unlikely that that could happen. And unfortunately, in my opinion, I think it's very unfair for her kids not to be taught anything to do with reading or writing. That is pretty unfair to those kids, because when they, hit their teen years and adulthood, there are going to be some of the few people around them that don't know how to read and write. I am assuming that these people, a lot of them are of high socioeconomic status, meaning that the people around them probably all have college degrees. They either that or they all own their own businesses. They all have a decent living. But these kids, a lot of them are going to be at a pretty dire situation, in my opinion. And there's this weird trend throughout her videos of her basically comparing students in a school being compared to inmates in a jail. Now, I know when you're young, you go to school and a lot of times you don't want to show up. Maybe you play hooky, you do a Ferris Bueller's Day Off one day, but quite frankly, it's kind of like one of those things like eating your vegetables. In the long run, it's going to be good for you. And it seems like this person, this mother in this TikTok, does not see it that way. She really thinks that students in schools are like inmates, that they're not able to socialize effectively, that they're basically restricted and their creativity is restricted. To some degree, you can see what she's trying to say. She's saying that, schools don't really value creativity. They value, other skills like reading and writing and math and science. Some students just may be creative. Well, not to pick on them again, but let's take a look at another video here.
We really just respond whenever they want to know something and do our best to make sure they really get it. And my big fear about free schooling was that if my kids only went towards what they were interested in, saving all of their real estate only for things they're interested in, not cramming it with anything necessary, I was concerned that they would never be interested in things like reading and writing and math. My son's 6, and it took some patience, and not comparing myself to other moms, but this is his book. Look at this. Lamp, egg, jar, lion. This is him doing this by himself, copying down words from other places, asking us more. Same with addition. Mom, what's 7 plus 5? It will come at the right time. But if you do not like this idea of sending your kids away for 40 hours a week and then wondering why they have no energy to do anything else, if you are not into your kids conforming, trust that you can follow their interests and they will learn everything they need to learn, not what other people need them to.
Well, there she goes, basically explaining what unschooling is in her terms. These students don't have any barriers, no restrictions. They kind of just learn as they go, supposedly. They don't really have any curriculum. They just do as they please. She expresses the idea that the learning of her children will come naturally, kind of like a thought or an epiphany. It will just come to them, hey, what does this mean? Hey, what does that mean? And in some sense, that may be true. We've all done that as young people, but in the long run, I mean, you go to school to kind of build a foundation. And if you don't have that foundation, well, that entire house, building, it's gonna collapse eventually. And it's kind of a slippery slope. She's not the only one. Like we said, this is a growing trend in the country. Here's the opinion of someone that was unschooled, and let's see what she has to say.
Part 2 to my unschooling video. I'd like to say I understand why people unschool. I understand the compassion they have for children and letting children be children. But here's the thing. Is a fun childhood really worth the expense of a quality adult life? Because childhood is only a small fraction of your life, while your adulthood is a huge fraction of it. What happens if your kid wants to become something like a doctor, but has a million missing gaps and can't keep up in school because they didn't learn tons of little bits of crucial information or critical thinking that school provides? Early education is really, really important. If you don't learn basic math as a child, you can't learn it later on in life. Your brain doesn't develop the way every other kid's brain developed because they learned it so early. I'm speaking from experience and witnessing the kids around me in my homeschool groups grow up and not do very well in college or have to get their GEDs like me because a mommy-made diploma doesn't cut it when it comes to going to college.
Yeah, I think she hit it on the nail there. I mean, she is someone that's been through this process and she's had time to look back and reflect on how it's affected her and her adulthood. And unfortunately, that's kind of what we've talked about, is that you don't have that foundation. You're going to be unable to do these big and bright things ahead. And it's unfortunate that we're having millions and millions of children across the country that are being unschooled. They're not really given the proper curriculum and sort of guidance throughout this process. Now, some may say that the school system today really isn't much better, but at least it is. You have teachers there that are being paid to do a job, that are being paid to at least showcase to your students an entire plethora of curriculums. It's kind of like the simple saying, something is better than nothing. Well, that really is how it is with education, in my opinion. And we're not really talking about post-secondary education. We're really talking about primary and secondary education. So we're talking from K to 12. These are pivotal years for a development of a person. Well, here's another example of a parent that is unschooling their children.
Teaching them hard work, taking care of the things that you love, that you need, and also just needed the car clean. Also teaching them how to follow instructions. Now they're going to go grocery shopping with me and we're going to learn about reading labels. We're going to learn about math and money and spending your money wisely. When you're buying groceries, you need to make sure that the quality of it is good. So turn it over on each one, make sure that there's no molded ones. Make sure they all look pretty good. And if they do, put them in their buggy. So we're going to get a whole pineapple because if we get a cut one, it's more expensive. It's cheaper to just get one yourself and cut it. Make sure that you open them, make sure they're not broken. All good. Right, so when you're reading the labels, I want you to just notice where it says includes added sugars. How many does that say? 0 on that one and 15 on, so we don't want sugars, right? So you're gonna get that one, okay? And the whole point of this is that I have so much more time with them to teach them things like this that's gonna actually help them in life. Like actually help them in life.
So they go in that TikTok and they basically explain that their child basically going with the vacuum and cleaning their car, doing the hard work is basically sufficient to them going to school and learning how to read and write. In my opinion, that's pretty absurd because just because you know how to vacuum doesn't really mean that you're going to be set up for success in the long term. And it seems like they're very hell-bent on their idea of how they should school their children. And like we've talked about before, it's very unfortunate that these children will not be given, most likely, the proper foundation and the proper guidance to do whatever they want in their lives. We're seeing millions of parents across the country take this naive notion that they know just as much as teachers or an entire teacher body in their local elementary school or middle school. To me, that's really absurd because one person doesn't know all the subjects. That's going to be very difficult. Even if you're a stay-at-home mom like a lot of these people are, there's going to be a lot of gaps in your students, your child's education. And you just going to the store and picking up a pack of strawberries and telling your kid that this is healthy, that just isn't enough. I mean, they're also going to like the yogurt aisle and saying that, hey, you should probably eat this organic yogurt because it's better for you. And I also want to say that this sort of unschooling trend, at least the examples that we've seen on TikTok, they really come from a point of privilege. A lot of these people, I would assume, are pretty well off financially. They don't really have too many worries. They're able to stay home with their children. They're not able to work any jobs. And if they are able to work their job, they can do it from home. Like you said, that lady, she was an entrepreneur. And she's going to teach her kids how to be that as well. But here's the problem. Not everyone has that mindset and not everyone is built like that. Maybe that kid is going to really like animals and they're going to want to be a zoologist or a veterinarian. But unfortunately, to be a veterinarian, you have to have many years of education and you have to be accepted to a university. So these kids are going to be at a huge deficit and a huge disadvantage. So we're seeing a very common trend here. basically giving absolute trust to your children that they are going to be interested and curious to learn. Well, unfortunately, as we know with kids and children, they don't always want to learn. They always, want to do the things that are fun. I remember being at an early age, I always wanted to play video games. And if I was unschooled, I probably would play video games all the time. And unfortunately, in the age of social media and instant gratification and iPad kids, you can really make the assumption that a lot of these kids are going to take the more fun route. They're going to want to watch more videos on YouTube, and they're going to want to just play games all day because it's available to them. Going to school is kind of a chore, but it's a necessary chore. It's something that develops someone to become something great when they're an adult. It really gives them the foundation. But okay, we've talked a lot of negativity about these unschooling parents. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Another example of someone that was unschooled, a very famous and successful person, was apparently Billie Eilish. She accounts that she really kind of just learned from watching her mom cook and kind of learning the things around her. But I think it's really important to note that Billie Eilish was raised in LA in a pretty well-off neighborhood, and her parents were both entertainers. They were both in the entertainment business, so she was likely high middle class, if not wealthy. She was given all the resources in the world to become something great, and she took advantage of that, and good for her. But unfortunately, for most people in the country, they're not in that weird, crazy scenario. It's very atypical for someone to be raised in LA and unschooled. I think a lot of this stems from people's lack of trust in public education today. We've seen a lot of things being floated out there that test scores are down, that students are not really learning too much, they're being over-tested, and to some sense, that's true. So can you fault some of these parents for being so worried, so much so that they're willing to take matters in their own hands? I mean, I guess it shows that they care for their children. I just think they're going about it the wrong way. And we've talked about on the channel that a lot of teachers have been quitting. We're seeing a huge turnover rate in the public education sector, basically identifying a huge problem in our education system. Teachers don't really have trust either. It's an entire system right now that lacks trust. It lacks accountability, and ultimately it's losing the trust of millions of Americans in the country.
I'm also concerned about what the education system is doing for other kids. I'm concerned that being trained for 40 hours a week to do things that robots can do in the age of AI is just setting kids up for failure. I believe that the most successful people that I've studied and learned from all say that the ability to be creative and solve problems is the most necessary key to success, as well as loving learning. And I'm concerned that the school system doesn't offer enough opportunity for creativity, for creative problem solving, and I also don't feel like it instills a deep love of learning because the kids are having to prove that they're learning all the time. Additionally, I have some concerns about the way the public school system mirrors the prison system, and I don't see it as a good place for socializing because you're not allowed to talk in class, just in like the mess hall and in the yard.
So there's this popular report and study done from Robert Wright, who's a political scientist from Stanford. He basically identified that homeschooling has a lot of risks for students, and it's things that would be common sense, obviously. One of them could be social isolation. And as we've noticed and talked about on the channel, that is a huge growing trend in an unfortunate situation that it's been manifesting itself throughout the country and throughout Gen Z, and especially going to be Gen Alpha. So social isolation is basically going to really hit a lot of these students that are unschooling right now. They might be 5 to 6 years old, 7 years old right now, but once they hit their teen years, they could really hit a huge moment of social isolation. One of the important findings that Reich has in his work is the idea of polarization. Now, this is something that we've talked about on the channel in great depth. The idea of social and political polarization, something that we haven't really seen before, is really manifesting itself across the country. It's really been going on for, I would suppose, the past decade. And if you have a lot of young people, a lot of these students that are being unschooled, you're going to have a huge portion of the population that by default, unfortunately, might have a very narrow view of the world. One of the great things about going to school in the United States is that it's a melting pot. You're really around a lot of different students, especially, if you get raised in the suburbs or in the cities. This idea of polarization could become a lot more prevalent if a lot more students, a lot more people are being unschooled. And I think this is something that we should kind of keep our eyes on. Unschooling, what an interesting and odd trend, in my opinion. Something that's been gaining a lot of popularity in this post-pandemic world that we're living in. But what do you guys think of this unschooling trend? Do you think it's a good idea, or do you think this worry is kind of blown out of proportion? Let me know in the comments section below. Now, there's clearly a difference between unschooling and homeschooling. This unschooling is definitely a lot more of a radical approach. Do you think this radical approach is something that will benefit these people in the long run? Be sure to hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. It helps us out and it shines a spotlight on stories like this. Well, thank you so much for watching and stay informed out there.